Hello and welcome to Diversity Matters. In this episode, we'll be exploring cults as well as the rising popularity of religious media. I'm talking to Mona Hennein, who is president and CEO of Life Focused Media. She's behind a documentary on Jonestown called Surviving Utopia, which tells the story of the Jonestown massacre and the legacy and lessons it's left behind. And there are some important ones for the media, especially how they portrayed the Black survivors of the tragedy.
Mona Hennein, thank you for joining me for Diversity Matters. I want to start by talking about your project Surviving Utopia. It's a documentary telling the story of the Jonestown massacre. And just to remind people listening, in 1978, 900 people at Jonestown lost their lives in a mass murder-suicide. I want to ask why this story? It's been told before. Why now?
Why this story is because one of my board members really actually sat next to a man who co-founded Jonestown, the People's Temple, with Jim Jones. And his name is not very well known. His name is Tim Stone. And she told me about him, and it took me a year to get him to talk to me. So basically, he was an attorney, and he's a Stanford grad, and he met Jim Jones, and he was so excited about what Jim Jones was doing. At that time, we were in the civil rights era. It was in the 70s, and he was a white male, and he was very, very angry about the discrimination against Blacks. And so here was this man, Jim Jones, that was offering really utopia for the Black people. And he was fighting against poverty, discrimination, all these problems. And he said, Jim Jones has the solution. He has this People's Temple where people are a community. And so he joined. And he was married at the time. He had a son. So basically, Tim Stone started the Jonestown cult. Well, he didn't start the cult. He started the Jonestown in Guyana. So that basically the idea is they told this group of mostly Black people, which most people don't know. When you look at Jonestown documentaries, it's mostly the white survivors. And there's a reason for that. And I'll tell you in a second. But mostly Black people, and decided we can start our own community. So it started out with a good idea, if you want to call it that. So the question you ask is why this story is because that is what we're all looking for. We are all looking for a place of peace where everyone is treated equally, where where love abounds, and where people are treated equally and fairly. And so I thought, well, this is fascinating. I didn't know that there was this man named Tim Stone. And actually his name, Jim Jones mentions him as the reason that everyone had to quote unquote drink the Kool-Aid, because Tim Stone eventually defected. So I was interested in that story. You started out wanting utopia, and then you defected, causing the murder of all these people, and your own son died. What went wrong? How, here you are wanting something good, and your hand was actually involved in something bad. That journey is very interesting to me. How does a good person end up being in such a horrible cult?
Okay, I want to get to the point you made in a minute about the storytelling focusing on the white survivors. So we'll come to that. But before that, I just wanted to touch on the point that this was quite a devastating event, obviously. How difficult was it, or is it, to tell that sort of a story?
Well, because we're 50 years to the, past it, a lot of people would say, oh, well, we're not that anymore. But to me, it was very important to tell this story because I think that if you understand the mechanics of a cult, if you understand how people could join a cult, then you will have unraveled any relationship that you are in, or any bad business deal that you're in, or, being in a cult, or understanding how someone so smart like Tim Stone, a Stanford trained attorney, and actually he was very religious too. He had a lot of faith. So don't, people who say, well, I have faith, and, you may be in a cult, you may be. And there are ways, true religion is freedom. True religion is not rules and regulations but anyway, so I felt like this story is probably the most critical story you could tell, because understanding the psychology and the mechanics of it would actually can free you to understand what a healthy relationship is, what a healthy business workplace is, what a healthy faith community is. And you can see the patterns that bring someone intelligent like us into total destruction.
Before we started the podcast, we were having a chat, and you were mentioning the importance of reminding people about cults, because we think it won't happen to us, but actually it really could.
Correct. There is cult-minded thinking. Now, I don't know if I'm not a psychologist, so I need to lay that down, but there is a way of thinking that makes you, that is cult-minded. And these are, some of the ideas about cult-minded thinking come from Tim Stone himself, because I asked him specifically, you came up from, he had a wonderful upbringing, and he graduated from a elite Christian college here in the States, and then went to Stanford and was a district attorney, and. So, how did where did your thinking go wrong? And there's many more, but here's I have 7 things. One of the things that is in cult-minded thinking is that Tim Stone joined because of his anger about the injustices in the world. That's a good thing, right? We should be angry. But where he went wrong, it was his only driving force. Number 2, he was only focused on one cause. So he became an extremist based on the cause of poverty and injustice in the Black community, which is great. That was, yes, there was injustice, worse in the 70s than it is now. Even after and this goes to the reason why you don't hear a lot of stories from the Black survivors, which I think there's only 65 or 60 survivors now. They're very few, because most people at that time looked down on the Black community. And so when they came back to the States or to their homeland after 900 people died, and most of the survivors are Black, they're like, well, yeah, you're uneducated. It makes sense. It makes sense why you would join a cult. But, so people didn't really pay attention to them. So, and so they felt very lonely. Can you imagine not having any trauma healing, you survive this, you go back to the States, and they expect you to go, come back to life. You just witnessed the death of 900 people. Anyway, so that's the next thing. So that he was an extremist around one cause. And then this really did kind of interest me, because we do this in relationships. We do this at work. We do this because you're part of a bigger picture. We're helping the poor people. This is really great. And then you see your leader steal a little money, or you see your leader, a little white lie, or you see that little thing. But the cause is so amazing. We're helping poor people. And you ignore that little thing. Now, does that mean if anytime someone has a little flaw or a little character flaw, you dump them? Or no, but you have to address it. So he kept ignoring the little things in Jim Jones along the way, because the cause of utopia was so great. So that's another thing that he did. And this is why most people say we join cults. He felt like a place he really belonged. So cults, companies, and narcissistic relationship. Now, again, I'm not a psychologist, but they like to start you off by, you belong here. We love you. This is your, oh my goodness, the love bombing. All these things are good. Everything that I'm saying is good, but it's not should be your driving force. You should be part of a family. You should be part of a company. You should, in my opinion, belong to a church or whatever. But that should not be the driving force that makes you ignore everything else. Another thing, it's chasing, again, it kind of sounds repetitive. You're chasing a dream rather than following a journey. So if a lot of people join really bad organizations because they want the yacht. They want that image. They see this image of them on a yacht or, with all the whatever. And so you're chasing that dream. And what happens when you chase a dream without character and journey and evaluation and whatever, sometimes you break some very important principles of your faith or of how you grew up. Truth is important. Process is important. Accountability is important. Don't chase the dream. Notice the little things. Go on a journey. Don't chase a dream. And then this is a big one. He stayed even though he knew it was all wrong. And there's this idea of, I forgot what the term is, lost cause. I mean, you have put so much time and money into this. I'm talking to a friend of mine now. I'm trying to get her out of a bad relationship, but she's been in it for 7 years. All this time that I put into it, all this, you feel like you've wasted time. If you leave, you've wasted all your efforts as you leave. But the truth is, you've learned a lot. You've become a better person in those 7 years of bad relationship. You didn't waste anything, but it's time to leave. And then the final is that he kept ignoring those little voices inside of him. This was something that's wrong. This is wrong. And that's also very dangerous. Don't ignore. I mean, especially the older you are, the more we know. So those are some of the things that I learned from his interview, which was probably the most interesting interview, most gripping interview I've ever conducted in my life, because it wasn't about cults. It was about living a free life, living a life of character. And for me, it would be living a life of faith. There are principles that you should live by and don't ignore them.
How concerned are you or worried are you now about cults after everything you've just mentioned and everything you've learned?
Very, very. So, I've heard people say, if you don't support this person or that person, you may not be a Christian. Like, that's bizarre. That's bizarre. That's cult-minded thinking. It happens in politics. It happens in a lot of churches now. People are just following leaders without any thought. That's very dangerous.
Let's talk about how this all plays out in the media. I want to go back to what you said about there wasn't enough storytelling about the Black survivors. Do you think 50 years later we'd see something quite different today?
It's still hard to get the stories of the Black survivors because they do have I talked to a Black producer friend of mine, and she said, please don't generalize Black people. But in a sense, a lot of the Black survivors do not trust the media because they have been so misrepresented and not judged well, and been, and because, most of the survivors were Black and you don't hear their stories. So because they're like discarded, like, well, yeah, you were uneducated, you were this, you were that, you were poor, you were that. And the survivors that I interviewed were not uneducated. They were quite intelligent.
So you spoke to some of them. Did they feel that, were they relieved to be able to tell their story?
Very relieved, but also very scared that I wouldn't represent them well. So, and I guess as a journalist, as a filmmaker, and I know you're in the same field, the greatest compliment you can give someone is to tell their story the way they want it to be told. And it's something that I fear, and anyone who works with me, do not be worried about telling the story the way they want it. Otherwise you'll have an agenda. But people want to be heard the way they want to be represented. And a lot of times what the number one mistake journalists make is they go out to get a story and they know in their head how that story is supposed to go before they even do the interview. So then, not that they're being dishonest, but then the story is shaped the way, they just pick what they want to make that story what they thought in their head is supposed to be. And so the art of journalism is when you interview someone that is of direct opposite view of you, and they write you and say, thank you for representing me well. Not that these survivors had an opposite view of me, but they have been misrepresented. That's why they hesitate to interview.
I want to move the last few minutes that we have left, just a little bit about something else you do with your company, which it was set up to bridge the gap in faith-based programming. How much interest is there from the public in this sort of storytelling or this angle from the story?
The public is very, very interested in spiritual matters. I mean, we air on public television, which is, you could say a lot of people would have the wrong conception that they're not interested in religion and faith. Public television is very interested in religion and faith. What they're not interested in is you're pushing your agenda. So, but people are more than anything, and I saw statistics that, especially young men are highly interested in faith and religion because, I think we're swinging the other way. There was a loss of interest, but I think you find that, the ultimate question that we have in life is who made me and why am I here? That's a religious question. So if the answer to that question is it's just random chance of evolution and all the millions of things that happened to create Tanya or to create Mona, random, and then you die, then what? That could put you in a state of despair. But if the answer to that question is there is a God who is intimately concerned about you and created you and gave you a purpose, and nothing is by random chance, then that could give you some hope for living and for dying. So that is the ultimate question, is why are you here? And I don't see how. I think we're all religious in that sense. What is the purpose of this? And I really believe the purpose of what you're doing is to enlighten that part, whatever cause that you're bringing up. Why care about diversity if there is not some sort of justice in this world? Why care about inclusion if we're not all created in God's image and we all should be included? Why care? Then who cares? But it is a religious question, no matter what.
So where do you see, a lot of stats are showing a lot of popularity growing in audio religious programming, particularly in America, I saw. So it's really interesting the way the media is moving, or religious sort of programming and media. Where do you see it going? What's the future outlook?
Well, obviously it is growing, and I think we're going to swing back to. I guess we're going to lean on the young people to tell us where it's going. I mean, I see that the young do want spirituality, but they don't want mega church anymore. They don't want a feigned. This feigned religion pushed on you. They want authenticity. They, the biggest. There's a revival movement in the States. It started at Asbury, a small little church in Kentucky. And it wasn't like the revivals that, the 70s. It was loud and, it's very quiet. It's just a quiet, authentic revival where people are discovering God, and it's moved and moved and moved, and it's very quiet. And so the young want to go back to the Catholic Church, which is quiet. It's authentic. There's not this, I myself am Protestant, but I'm seeing it's the smaller churches that are growing, the quiet ones. It's the young people that are leading it. They tend to lead the revivals and the movements. And if we are wise, we should listen.
Now, you, in 1 minute or less, are you bringing them into the programming? Are we seeing them driving the content and media programming?
Absolutely. My latest program is Urban Trauma Healing, which will air on public television here. We are looking at an ignored population, especially in Chicago, is the youth who face a lot of violence, and not only gun violence, domestic violence, broken homes and families. And we're producing a series for them to look at their trauma and how faith is a solution to the wounds of their heart. So we're very excited about it because from the churches, the Black churches, especially that we hear from, and the Black community, no one ever addresses the trauma that a lot of Chicago youth face. And they're like surprised that anyone cares even. So believe it or not, even though this is what you hear about Chicago, violence and all that, but no one actually is looking at how faith is actually a real solution. So we're very excited about that.
That's a positive note to end our discussion on, and good luck with the program. And thank you so much for talking to me about cults and about religion and media. It's been a fascinating discussion.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Thank you.
My thanks again to Mona Hennein for her insights into cults, why religious media content is popular, and how it can cater for youth and other groups who feel their stories are not being told. That's it for this episode of Diversity Matters, brought to you by the Media Diversity Institute. You can find out more information, stories, and reports on issues related to the media and inclusion on our website. I'm Tanya Saksuski. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to your company again. Take care.